In ancient times, why did Rome, the Latin city-state in the middle of the Italian peninsula, manage to create a large empire, whereas the Greek city-state of Sparta only remained a power in Greece? In other words, why did Sparta not become the empire that Rome did? And the answer to this question lies in the nature of the society and the politics of both of these city-states, which on the surface might look similar, both being city-states during classical antiquity that in history were renowned for their warlike nature, but as we will see, were rather different from each other. As for Sparta, Sparta was a very rigid, conservative society by constitutional design in many regards. They had a constitution which was very strong and durable in terms of clarity, checks and balances, with the goal of encouraging a strong military and oppressing and keeping down the helots, the state slaves that were regularly killed in brutal killings by the Spartan citizens, granting a very limited franchise and voting among the citizens that had finished military service, and limiting the monarchy to a very defined rule, and keeping society very stable and unchanging was the goal of their constitution. As Sparta was a society that was almost solely focused upon a certain militaristic warrior ideal, and thus did not innovate much, and gave up creating art, literature, fancy housing, fine clothes, gold and silver, jewelry and most luxury items. And their education in their state system consisted of a semi-standardized military school that was to create good Spartan warriors and not much else. Spartans did not go into business and delegated the lesser Peloponnesian residents, the Peroki, to handle all business, trade and manufacturing. The Spartans did not keep a navy that was permanent and rarely went to sea. Sparta usually kept also to itself within the Peloponnesian region and did not trade much and did not permit many visitors, and Spartans did not visit foreign city-states themselves unless on a diplomatic or military mission. And unlike Rome, Sparta never expanded citizenship or allowed others to join their city-state. And with regard to the territory that they had, Sparta had Lakonia and then conquered Messenia, a richer province, and made the Messenian people helots, that's the state slaves of Sparta, and then spent centuries making sure that they kept the Messenians in subjugation as helots, along with their own helots that they had previously in Lakonia. The helots outnumbered the Spartans by 7-1 by some estimates, so the Spartans had to stay in shape, train for war constantly, and keep vigilant and not leave their territory very often, as that would invite slave rebellions. In contrast, Roman slaves rarely outnumbered Roman citizens and free people, and were at the highest only 40% of the population, usually taken from foreign lands and used on newly conquered foreign soil. In contrast, Spartan slavery and conquests were much more local. Sparta had all the land she needed in order to practice this type of slavery and did not need to expand further, and the number of full Spartan citizens never went much beyond 8,000 soldiers. It was difficult to obtain and then keep Spartan citizen status, and when the Spartans were killed in battle in larger numbers, it meant a huge issue of stability to the Spartan state, as Sparta was a closed society and the non-Spartans could not achieve equality with the Spartans by receiving citizenship. You could only be birthed into the citizenship of Sparta. In Rome there existed some other ways to acquire Roman citizenship. This issue of there being so few true Spartans in Spartan society meant that Sparta, when they tried to establish foreign enclaves after they had won the Peloponnesian War against Athens, they had to do it with newly freed helots and not many true Spartan citizens, which caused issues of control when it came to controlling these enclaves by the limited amounts of Spartans that existed. And it also caused issues with spreading out the warriors of Sparta over a greater area, weakening the response and concentration of Spartan force in response to various wars and conflicts, which would prove disastrous for Spartan society when the Spartan citizens capable of bearing arms shrank to only about 1,000 active warriors. About half of them were killed at the Battle of Leuctra by Thebes, which then liberated Messenia, making Sparta a smaller second-rate power, never to rise again and to be important in Greek politics. In comparison to Sparta, Rome, although it was not open to foreigners, it was still open to converting people into citizens by converting foreigners and assimilating them into the Roman system and Roman culture, and granted Roman citizenship to non-citizens. Rome also traded widely, expanded into Italy, and took influences from various Italic cultures, such as the Samnites, the Oscans, the Celts, the Greeks, the Etruscans, and many more. Through its expansions and through various agreements, Rome also vastly, throughout its history, increased the number of its citizens and always sought more conquests to expand their borders, to assimilate more people into Rome. In comparison, Sparta was a closed society, wholly concerned with keeping what they had conquered in the near vicinity of Sparta, through maintaining the status quo and not changing things, which could lead into problems maintaining the Spartan way of life, the Spartan warrior way. Though the constitution of the Roman Republic had some clear lines, such as there should never be a king ruling over Rome, one of the reasons as to why later emperors were in fact never kings officially. I've made a video about that, which you can see. It was still much more flexible when it came to the governmental system of Rome, and it allowed Rome to create new institutions and new systems of governments when it was needed. Also, the focus of the society was entirely different. Though Sparta had a very regimented society with strict rules, it was still very focused upon making strong individual warriors and to care for the individual Spartans' lives. The Roman system was not a system built for individualistic warriors, but for collectivist soldiers to serve the interests of the greater Roman society. Rome can be said to be a soldier society dependent upon a bureaucracy, dependent upon the development of institutions around it. In Rome, the individual was there for the state as a soldier, rather than the Spartan system of the state being there to make great individual warriors. The Roman system created large armies that were standardized and controlled through institutions that were backed up by tradition, and not through individual tradition, like in Sparta, that created smaller units of warriors. And the bureaucratic and institutionalized system of Rome could be greater in scope and produced consistent quality soldiers in numbers, which were not the case with an individualized warrior society like Sparta. Individuals might also win battles, but well-trained large armies win wars. And thus, Rome was better at expansion than Sparta, and had the ability to expand due to its systems in a way that Sparta never had. Rome had an expansionist and interactive view of the world, rather than a limited scope of Sparta. Rome had to have this view, as they were surrounded by peoples that they had a lot less in common with than Sparta had. Sparta was surrounded by other Greeks, where they easily could make alliances or avoid conflicts with through other means. Rome, on the other hand, was pretty much alone if they didn't begin to actually assimilate other peoples and actually integrate them into their system. And unlike Sparta, Rome always had an ever-constant threat of a bigger enemy just around the corner, whereas Sparta only had to contend with other small Greek city-states, which they could maintain peace with through various balances of power and diplomatic connections that didn't force Sparta to make many concessions, unlike the Romans, when they had to integrate various people, such as the other Latin city-states, or the Oscians, or the Samnites, or the Greeks in the south, or the Etruscans. And this flexibility of the Romans and attitude of being forced to ever expand in order to secure their own borders made the Romans a great empire, whereas the Spartan society and politics made Sparta stay as a small Greek city-state. So in the end, these two very warlike city-states of Rome and Sparta developed very differently because they were very different in their political structures, in their societies, and in their surrounding areas and the political context in which they operated in.
Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities.
اشتركوا بالقناة من فضلكم.